A 17-year-old girl came out of a cafe in which she was working on weekends and disappeared without a trace. The police began to find disturbing evidence that led them to think that something really scary had happened to the girl. From the first days, this case became the main news topic in Sweden, and more than 1,000 people joined the search, making them the largest in the history of the country. When the sad truth still surfaced, people were shocked by how this could have happened. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in a small Swedish town of Skövde. It was a quiet and peaceful place. She lived there with her parents and older sister. Lisa was a kind, positive, and determined person. Even before the end of school, she decided that she wanted to go to Australia and study there as an architect. In addition, she often travelled with her parents, visiting many other countries. The girl was also very independent. From an early age, she tried to find various jobs to earn money on their own. Before the beginning of the summer of 2015, when Lisa was 17, she got a job at the first serious work in a cafe, located about 40 minutes from her home. The first few weeks, her parents drove her there by car, but soon her father bought her a scooter. Lisa had the right to this type of transport, and she could get a car only after 18 years old. The girl was glad to receive this gift because she wanted to get to work on her own. Nevertheless, her father for several weeks accompanied her because Lisa had practically no driving experience on the road. She worked only on weekends, and her father drove with her every morning and evening. Only on June 7th, the girl first went to the cafe alone on her scooter. Closer to lunch, her parents decided to go to her to work to have a snack and visit her daughter. That day there were a lot of visitors in the cafe and Lisa was heavily busy with work. She took a short break for lunch, had a snack with her parents, and they went home. At 6:23 p.m, Lisa wrote to her father that she was leaving work, but 3 minutes later, he got a call from her phone. The man took the phone, but no one answered him. He heard some voices in the background and thought that Lisa accidentally pressed the call. The father thought his daughter was talking to his colleagues. He also heard the sound of the car door slamming. The man said her name a few more times, then interrupted the call and began to wait for her to get home. An hour had passed since then, and the girl's parents began to worry. Lisa was already supposed to be there, and her father immediately thought that something could happen to her on the road. It was the first time she had been riding a scooter on her own, and the man was very worried about her safety. He tried to call her several times, but Lisa's phone was off. After waiting a few more minutes, the father decided to go to meet her. The girl was supposed to go on the shortest road, and the man hoped to meet her on the way. The father feared that his daughter could get into an accident, so he moved at a low speed, inspecting the road. But Lisa was nowhere. The man drove to the cafe without finding his daughter. Arriving at the place of her work, he saw a parked scooter of Lisa in front of the building. At that moment, the man was already frankly panicking because he could not find his daughter throughout the entire journey. Having noticed her transport, he immediately calmed down. The father thought that the girl for some reason was late at work. However, there was no one at the institution, and the man noticed something else. The keys to the scooter were stuck in the ignition, and he also did not have Lisa's helmet. This finally led him to the thought that something bad had happened to the girl. She would never have left the keys in the scooter, throwing it in the parking lot without supervision. Meanwhile, Lisa's mother called the owner of the cafe in the hope that she could shed light on the disappearance of the girl, but the woman said she had no idea where she could go. She called her employees at about 6 p.m, and they said they were going to close the establishment. After a call from Lisa's mother, the owner of the cafe immediately got into the car and headed there. On the way, she called her friends who lived next to the establishment and asked them to help with the searches. 4 people responded to this request. When the owner of the cafe arrived, they, together with the girl's father, began to comb both the institution and the adjacent territory. Their last hope was that Lisa, for some reason, decided to go home not by scooter, but by bus. They found out the schedule, and the girl's mother and her older sister immediately went to the bus stop in their city. Unfortunately, this version was not confirmed. Lisa was not on the bus, and her relatives immediately turned to the police. By that time, it was already almost 10 p.m, and it was getting dark on the street. The police immediately began large-scale searches. The fact that the girl's scooter was left in the parking lot with keys led them to think about possible kidnapping. Such things happen in Sweden quite rarely, and even less often in their remote provincial areas. Therefore, the officers immediately sent several groups with dogs on the search, and other policemen began to bypass every house in that area. Soon after Lisa's disappearance, her classmates and friends recognized her. They began to search for witnesses. The search for the girl continued all night, but they did not bring any results. On Monday morning, the police department announced the disappearance of Lisa, calling for sharing any useful information with them. At about the same time, men who had been arrested by the police approached them. The police department was not able to find any evidence, but the police department was able to find the missing person. The police department announced the disappearance of Lisa, calling for sharing any useful information with them. At about the same time, men turned to them who went to work and found a motorcycle glove in an industrial barn located right opposite the cafe. At the same time, the police examined this barn on the evening of the disappearance of the girl, but they did not notice the glove there. Her parents showed it to Lisa, and they confirmed that the glove really belonged to her. This further strengthened the version of the kidnapping, and the policemen threw additional resources into the search. By that time, the news of the disappearance of the girl spread around the district, and hundreds of volunteers joined the search. On Tuesday, the policemen received several more disturbing clues. Volunteers examined the area along the roadside, starting a few hundred meters from the cafe. There they found a phone case, check, ticket, and a broken smartphone screen. Investigators immediately found that all these items belonged to Lisa and concentrated their search in this area. Soon they found other parts of the broken smartphone, Lisa's documents, and several more checks. All these items were scattered along the same roadside. After the discovery of these evidence, the police were almost no doubt that Lisa had been a victim of kidnapping. They threw all their strength into her search, and every day more and more indifferent people joined them. This case became the main news topic throughout Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers came from all over the country to take part in the search. The case was also connected by a volunteer organisation specialising in searching for missing people. All this led to the fact that Lisa's searches have become the largest in the history of the country. More than 1,000 people took part in them in total. The police also received many calls with potential clues. One woman said she went for a run a day before Lisa's disappearance. In the middle of the road, a man stopped her, who was standing next to his car. He spoke to her in English and asked her to tell the way to some city, which the woman had never heard of. She showed him the direction in Google Maps, but then the man asked her to sit in his car and show the route on his navigator. Of course, the woman responded to such a request with great suspicion and refused, after which she ran further. In a conversation with the police, she noted one interesting detail. She seemed to have already seen this man among the workers who were repairing the bar opposite the cafe. Lisa's colleagues also told something interesting. One of the waiters noticed on the day of disappearance that two men were standing across the road from the cafe and looking towards the establishment. She did not attach much importance to this, but after Lisa's disappearance, she decided to share this observation with the police. The next morning, on Wednesday, the father of the girl, together with his friends, went to search the road where her belongings were found. A little further, he found several more disturbing finds. Lisa's driver's license on a scooter, and her keys from the house. It all looked like Liza was being taken along this road in the direction of the cafe, and the kidnapper threw her things away. The police and volunteers threw all their strength into further search in this area, but no other things were found. That same evening, Liza's father Liza returned home from the search. Driving past the cafe, he noticed that the bar where the girl's glove was found was removed by the police tapes. The man decided to go there and take a flashlight with him, since it was already dark outside. He walked around the room for a few minutes until something shiny was attracted by something shiny on the floor. Coming closer, he saw a female earring, and not far from her, the second one. The man reported this to the police, and they showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that these ornaments belonged to their daughter. The police rehooked the barn and searched it more carefully. The chief detective later said that on the first day of the search for Lisa, they were focused on finding the girl herself, so the barn was inspected superficially. Because of this, they could miss such small objects as earrings. But this time they attracted many criminals and filmologists. During the second search, they paid attention to a very unusual evidence. Behind one of the partitions, they noticed a very unusual evidence. Behind one of the partitions, the police found human feces. At first glance, it may seem that this has nothing to do with the case. However, the criminals have put forward a fairly justified version. They said that at the time of committing serious crimes, the criminals are producing a colossal amount of adrenaline, which is why they often feel the need to get up. For example, there are often situations when the killer can get wet before committing a crime or during it. Given that the police found Lisa's, the search zone was expanded and volunteers reached the farm located about 3 kilometers from the cafe. It was a complex of several large buildings in which many people worked, and the search team members decided to inspect them all. However, almost immediately after they arrived at the place, 2 men approached them. They did not know Swedish and spoke only English. One of them said that the police had already examined this farm, but the head of the search group was doubtful of this information. He thought that in this case he would know about it and ordered to continue the search. Those 2 men for some time walked around the territory of the farm and watched the volunteers, after which they left. About an hour later, the search group members found a bunch of branches behind the cow herd, under which they found a motorcycle helmet, jacket and headphones. The police immediately came to the scene and confirmed that all these things belonged to Lizzie. They directed criminals to this farm for a more thorough search and also listened to the story of 2 strange men who tried to persuade volunteers to inspect the farm. The policemen remembered the story of a woman who encountered a suspicious man speaking English. Moreover, they already guessed who they were talking about. From the first days of the search, they went around all the houses next to the cafe, and 2 brothers from Lithuania lived in one of them, as well as the wife of one of them. All 3 did not know Swedish and spoke English. These were the only people in the radius of several kilometers who did not speak the local language. The police also had other indirect reasons for suspicion in their address. The brothers worked in a bar opposite the cafe and on the farm where they found Lisa's helmet. They were well acquainted with these buildings and the adjacent area, and the road along the village along which they discovered many things of the girl turned to their home. Considering that there were no other suspects the police did not have, they decided to interrogate all 3. While they were driving after them to deliver them to the farm, the criminals arrived. Together with volunteers, they continued to inspect the farm, and their attention attracted an old trailer. He stood surrounded by tall grass and looked like they had not been used for many years. However, next to his door, the vegetation was crumpled, as if something had been lying there recently. In addition, part of the grass was jammed with a door, which means someone had recently opened it. As soon as the criminals opened the door, they were immediately met by a strong dead smell. The trailer was equipped with clothespans. Apparently it was once used as a locker for workers. All the cupboards except one were locked, and the experts thought that Lisa's body was in one of them. They began to open them in turn, but quickly noticed that the girl's body was in the open, behind the chest of old clothes and rags. Despite the small size of the locker, the killer managed to put his victim there. Lisa had a rope on her neck and a large amount of tape on her head. Her pants were lowered and the t-shirt was thrown up. Medical experts found that Lisa died of suffocation. At the same time, they did not find any traces of abduction from the victim. All her clothes were handed over to the experts. In the meantime, information about the discovery of the body spread throughout the country. Throughout the week, news of the kidnapping of a 17-year-old girl was the main information reason in Sweden, and when her body was found and the public learned that Lisa was brutally killed, this case flew literally all over the country. Crimes of this kind occurred in Sweden extremely rarely, and people were shocked by the fact that someone could create such an evil. The same day when the body of the girl was found, something unusual and very creepy happened. YouTube users found a video published 13 days before the murder. The name of the video was 13, and the video itself was a timer counting time. The most disturbing was the name of the channel that published this video. His name was Lisa Holm. Information about this video immediately spread through the media, and many people were shocked by such a set of coincidences. Some began to think that some user predicted the murder, But in fact, everything turned out to be much simpler. Apparently, someone just changed the name of the channel and the video after the girl's body was found. Either this person wanted to create another conspiracy theory or just play a bad joke. Meanwhile, the police had a task to find the killer in the shortest possible time. At the time of Lisa's discovery, the investigators had already taken 2 brothers and a woman to the site, and all 3 denied their involvement. They said that at the time of the kidnapping they were at home, confirming the alibi of each other. According to them, the older brother, named Nereus, added that at about 8 p.m. he woke up and went to the gas station, where he bought pizza and cigarettes. The police did not hasten to believe in their alibi, since all 3 could simply block each other. They took samples of DNA from them, but the investigators still did not have a single evidence that would link them to the murder. But it didn't last long. The criminals worked in the barn and on the farm, using all available resources and forces, and soon it brought its fruits. In the barn, located opposite the cafe, there was something like a small office cabinet. There was a large window in it, which went straight to the cafe. After studying this room, the experts found 15 different traces of male semen on the walls and floor of this window. Everything looked like a man was standing there and watching the workers of the institution, among which was Lisa, and satisfied himself. These samples of semen were immediately sent to the laboratory, wherein DNA profile was extracted from them in the shortest possible time. All 15 traces of semen completely coincided with the DNA of the older brother, the 35-year-old Nereus. The same goes for the feces found in the barn. They also belonged to him. In the room next door to the office, which was for the storage of cow's milk, the criminals noticed the pipe. It was about 2 meters from the floor and was covered with a thick layer of dust, with the exception of a small strip. The size of this strip coincided with the rope that was wound around Lisa's neck. In addition, traces of blood were found on this pipe. DNA analysis showed that it belongs to Nereus. On the floor under the pipe, they also found a piece of exactly the same rope. Experts studied it and highlighted 2 DNA profiles, Lisa and Nereus. For the police, this was the first serious hitch. The man definitely interacted with the rope that killed the girl. In addition, on the floor of this room found Lisa's hair. Another important evidence was obtained from her jacket. She also found traces of DNA belonging to Nereus. Based on the available data, the police decided that she was killed right here. They formed an approximate picture of what happened. In their opinion, Nereus for some time watched the cafe, and when Lisa was left alone in the parking lot, he drove up to her in his car. Further, based on the woman's run-through, the man could ask Lisa to point him in the direction to some city, after which Nereus could ask her to sit down to him in the car to drive the route into the navigator. Given that Lisa was a kind and responsive person, she could agree. As soon as the girl was in the car, the criminal wrapped her mouth with tape and drove up to the bar opposite. There, he wrapped a rope around the girl's neck and hung her on a pipe. According to experts, it was this very spectacle excited the man so much that due to an excess of adrenaline, he got up on the floor. After that, he put Lisa's body in the car and went to the farm, on the way throwing her things out of the window. There, he hid the body in the drawer of the trailer, covering it with old clothes that were lying around. All this from the moment of the kidnapping took the criminal less than an hour. Despite all the evidence, Nereus continued to insist on his innocence. His wife and younger brother had to be released, as there was nothing against them. Having been released, they almost immediately left Sweden and returned to their homeland, Lithuania. The trial was very tense. Nereus said that he had worked in that bar for a long time. His DNA could have been there during this work. In addition, he had an alibi given by his wife and brother. Despite the fact that both sources raised serious doubts, in court this should definitely to play a man in favour. On the other hand, it was only possible to explain the presence of the DNA of Nereus on the victim's clothes by the fact that he directly touched it. In addition, the police found witnesses who saw his car near the cafe shortly before Lisa, and also after that. According to them, this car drove several times along the road between the cafe and the farm, at the same time when Nereus allegedly slept at home. For several months after the discovery of her body, experts continued to study the evidence, using the most modern laboratories. In the end, they managed to find traces of Nereus DNA almost on all Lisa's clothes, including the inside of her underwear. Given that the whole country was still watching the case, the investigators continued to look for any other useful evidence that ate in the evening. But when the turn came to the younger brother, the policemen suddenly got what they wanted. After the man was told about all the evidence against his brother and described in detail what he had done to a 17-year-old girl, the man decided to confess everything. He said that he had been involved in the evidence against his brother and described in detail what he did with a 17-year-old girl. The man decided to confess everything. He said that in fact Nereus was absent at home that evening, returning only at 8:30. He was all dirty and immediately threw all his clothes in the washing machine. When the policemen began to bypass all the residents and reach their home, Nereus whispered to his brother, "Tell them that I was home at this time." Later, he explained it as follows. Nereus feared that he would be hanged for a foreign crime, since he is an immigrant and he has no alibi for the time of kidnapping. The younger brother really believed that his relative had nothing to do with the murder, but after getting acquainted with all the evidence, he realized that he was very wrong. Lisa's funerals took place only a month after her murder. The church they passed could accommodate only 130 people, but there were much more who wanted to say goodbye to the Be Much More organisers, decided to install benches and large screens on the street so that everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder. This case again attracted the attention of the whole of Sweden, so all participants of this process were under strong pressure. None of them had the right to make a mistake. Nereus's lawyer insisted that the DNA of his client could have gotten into the victim's clothes because he worked in that barn. The accusation side indicated that this version does not make any sense, especially in the case of Lisa's underwear. The only option in which the suspect's DNA could have been there is if he touched the victim's clothes. No other clear excuses from Nereus sounded. His lawyer only tried to promote the version that the real killer was the younger brother, who took many samples of Nereus's DNA and placed them on the victim's body, as well as on the crime scene. However, he could not explain the physical possibility of such manipulations from DNA. The trial ended a month later, and Nereus was found guilty of murder. The man was sentenced to life in prison of a strict regime, which rather resembles a good 3-star hotel. His lawyer tried to appeal the sentence, but the appeal was rejected. In early 2017, Nereus himself filed a request for his deportation and transfer to prison in the homeland. The reason for this decision is unknown. Lithuanian prisons are very different from Swedish ones in the worst way. However, the court decided to satisfy his request. In the end, ensuring comfortable conditions for the verdict is covered by the Swedish taxpayer in several $100s a day for each individual criminal. Later in the same year, his motives became clear. He filed an appeal to the Lithuanian court, and his term was reduced from life to 15 years. However, the killer had to rejoice for a short time. A few weeks later, the appeal court cancelled this decision, and Nereus was forced to spend his entire life in prison again. Only now he had no opportunity to return back to a comfortable Swedish cell. 5 years later, in August 2022, Nereus faced another minus of being transferred to a Lithuanian prison. While the prisoners were being transferred to another building, one of them threw himself at a man with a sharp point. Nereus received serious cuts and died on the way to the hospital. As for his wife, the question of her involvement is still not completely excluded. The police noted that there is practically no possibility of her direct participation in the kidnapping or murder, since in this case the experts should have found her DNA on Lisa's clothes or things. However, it cannot be excluded that she knew about her husband's crimes and helped him hide from the justice, providing a false alibi. Nereus's younger brother also raises questions. Cafe employees said they saw 2 men standing near the barn and watching them. Given that one of them was most likely Nereus himself, the second had to be his brother. Nevertheless, the DNA of the man was not found in the barn itself or on Lisa's clothes, which makes his participation in the murder unlikely. Perhaps they really watched the young employees with their older brother and even discussed some indecent things. But only Nereus decided to commit such an act was decided only by Nereus. Share your opinion in the comments and do not forget to like this video if you liked it.